Alors, avec votre permission, nous avons maintenant 3 communications individuelles, 3 separate talks. And the first one is by Valias Spiliotopoulos and Saskia Style de l'Université Simon Fraser. Cette présentation-là sera suivie de celle de ma collègue Claire Trépanier. Et la troisième communication sera une communication filmée. Et la personne en question, Mary Chopé-Paquet, sera en ligne par la suite pour répondre aux questions. Donc, notez vos questions. Questions will be answered in the final question period. So, sans plus attendre, je cède la place à Valia. I'll be the bad person there, sitting there this time.
Thank you very much. My colleague, Dr. Saskia Still, was unable to make it today, but she provided significant input into the presentation and also to our new Center for English Language Learning, Teaching, and Research. So I'll start the presentation with some guiding questions and look at some of the key similarities and differences between immersion and what we're calling loosely English medium of instruction programs in British Columbia. It's an Anglo-dominant context. Looking at the teaching and learning context there, the story of our new center, and some concluding remarks. So I've also been involved, I'm a student of core French. I've also been involved in researching and studying and teaching in French education. And when I assumed the role of director of the new Center for English Language Learning, Teaching, and Research, we were really looking at, well, what are the different models of language support at the university level? And we have a lot of scholars from the US, from Europe, Australia, and I'm getting all this input, but then I'm thinking, well, what about our own Canadian context and the rich research and practice done in immersion education here in Canada? So, and how might the lessons learned after over 50 years of immersion inform English medium of instruction programs in an Anglo-dominant, yet very multilingual and multicultural context in the far west of Canada? What are we learning currently by implementing a variety of language and literacy learning approaches at the post-secondary level, and what are the implications for both policy and practice? So, very briefly, I mean, you all know this. What have we learned from immersion? Well, of course, it can lead to additive bilingualism. It doesn't negatively impact disciplinary knowledge and literacy, and it can lead to communicative competence. We know that students' receptive skills are fairly good, but that there are gaps in expressive and oral written skills and in grammar. And interestingly, we see those same gaps in expressive skills at the post-secondary level with some multilingual learners, and they lead to dropout rates. Of course, this is all coming from Cummins' work quite a while ago. It is a bit dated, on immersion education for the millennium, what we have learned from 30 years of research on second language immersion. So I just thought I'd go over and do a bit of a comparison. In our English language programs at Simon Fraser University, the second language is the language that is the medium of instruction is often the second language or the third language or even the fourth language for some of our students. But it's also the first language for students in that classroom as well. Unlike immersion, there's no support for a multilingual student's first language, and there's not a real emphasis on language awareness. And we still tend to find those transmission-oriented type of pedagogies at the post-secondary level, whereas in, the communicative approach was strongly encouraged in immersion programs. In immersion programs, they're built for additive bilingualism, but really even though I'll give you the stats a bit later, there are classrooms where we have 60% English as an additional language or multilingual students. And even for most disciplinary faculty, language is just not a goal. not a learning objective. And most of the students really do come with varying degrees of English language proficiency. And outside of the classroom, there are, depending on the linguistic group, there are quite a lot of opportunities to speak in the mother tongue. So in immersion, teachers are bilingual, and increasingly there are more, not necessarily official bilingual, but bilingual or multilingual faculty at SFU. But the understanding is that they're expected to teach, to research, and to publish in English. So it is very much in that way. English is a lingua franca, Anglo-dominant. Of course, though, other important differences at the post-secondary level is that we're dealing with adult learners who are much more self-directed. So the L1s and the L2s are together in the classroom. Students are paying fees. There's high-stakes assessment because they really want to get into certain programs, and which will affect their career trajectory. And there's high-stakes communication in professional or cooperative education contexts that they're training for. So what we know, even from immersion pedagogy, is that pedagogy is really, really important. Some French immersion teachers have been hesitant to include cooperative learning, team-based activities in the classroom for fear that students will use their first language. And in fact, faculty at the post-secondary level at our university are also very hesitant. But what we know from the interdependence language principle and from plurilingual pedagogies is that to a certain extent, the home language or the first language can be used as a resource to help with conceptual understanding and then to be able to use that to express oneself in the target language. But what's really important is that we have to keep in mind that there has to be enough exposure to the target language provided. And what we're really trying within our new center is more of an immersion model. Right now, for the most part, there's a submersion model where, because language is not, I mean, it's an issue, but it's not top of mind amongst the disciplinary faculty. It's important to really reinforce the importance of scaffolding for comprehensible input and output, and in particular, those critical literacy skills. So, knowing what we know, let's look more carefully at our context. SFU is Canada's leading comprehensive university, founded in 1965. We compete up there with UVic. We have about 30,000 undergraduate students. I think it would be fair to say we have approximately 20% international students now. 5,000 graduate students. And when I looked at the undergraduate survey, 42% have English as an additional language, and 12% don't speak any English at home. So these are all influences of immigration, transmigration, and internationalization initiatives, which are very big in BC, given our geographical location. So in 2011, a report came out from the Senate committee where instructors at SFU were expressing concerns that inadequate language skills are hampering the academic success of multilingual or EAL students, and that, instructors are frustrating. So the students are the problem. Because, these are some of the myths of mainstream multilingual students, and we find it in the literature that come out, that they slow down the class, they don't participate, group work becomes challenging, marking their writing is so time-consuming, we have to dumb down the courses. I mean, we hear all of these things. And so, the discourse was framed in terms of a student deficit model of being multilingual, not in terms of the reciprocal benefits of a global student body. And so with the new center, we really wanted to, that's one of our goals, is to change that institutional culture. But of course, the biggest myth of all that some disciplinary faculty have is, let's just give these EAL students 1 or 2 courses to remediate, fix their perceived deficiencies in writing, and that if you can learn to write well in one course, then you can write well in another course and in all the disciplines. And we know, particularly for the lawyers in the room, for example, that each discipline has its own discourse, and it's like learning another language, right? So what we've learned from immersion, of course, is that language development takes time, and that students do need that additional support, whether it's through pathway or bridging programs, and there really needs to be that explicit focus on language. And traditionally what we've seen is that language support was peripheral to the curriculum. And so what we're trying to do is bring it into the curricular core. And what we're saying to disciplinary faculty is that you are also part of that curricular core. And even though you think you're only teaching content or knowledge or the discipline, without realizing it, you're also teaching language. So SFU and the programs at SFU, language is, English is the language used for instruction, but it is a very, very multilingual and multicultural context. And the reality of this context is not about to change, according to Neil Murray in his recent book on standards of English in universities. And that really we need to rethink how we look at language in higher ed as not only a tool for communication or instruction, but a historically and social-culturally bound complex semiotic system, according to Laurent Camerata, that can impact thinking and one's identity. So really reinforcing that role of identity in language, particularly at the post-secondary level. And that we really shouldn't only be aiming towards competence in English, but plurilingual competence. These students are here. They're coming at SFU from China, India, South Korea, Taiwan, France, Germany, Saudi Arabia. They're not only international students, but they're transnational, plurilingual, parachute kids coming in at grade 10 and then going on into post-secondary. Generation 1.5, so kind of like me, from immigrant students, came to Canada very young and learning 1 or both languages. And this is all part of a widening participation agenda, but also one of increased marketization of higher education. So we can't forget that important influence, where we really need to think about a sustainable model of internationalization in higher education. One that really focuses on, if some of these students are going to drop out, on student retention, on readiness, and on success. So since these multilingual students are here from various pathways, how can we help them to succeed? Because what we know from, the English assessments like IELTS and TOEFL and the Language Proficiency Index, they're not necessarily optimal indicators of academic success. And we do have to keep in mind the BICS and the CALPS from Cummins. It takes the differences between communicative and academic language proficiency. So what we're trying to do at SFU is, what is this new model of support? And that's a very big and important decision to make, given this complexity. Which models do we embrace? What is new and innovative? What are the criteria for making that decision? Which model is effective, feasible, sustainable, equitable? What is unique about second language learning within our Western Canadian context? And what have we learned from Asia, Australia, Europe, and the US? But what have we learned most importantly from 50 years of immersion here? So to support student readiness, what we have, I think, in universities across Canada and at SFU is we have ESL programs. Typically, they're in continuing studies units, as well as EAP programs. And what our new center is trying to look at is these CLEAL models, to a certain extent, that we find here at the University of Ottawa and in Europe and in other contexts, that really engage with language that's embedded in discipline-specific academic and professional context. So currently we have self-access centers, and I don't think we want to remove these supports. These are still really important supports, but it doesn't seem to be enough. We still have these self-access centers. We have these non-credit ESL, EAP courses, teaching and learning centers that help faculty with pedagogical innovations for supporting multilingual learners. We have at SFU what's called the W Initiative, really helping with students with writing skills, the Back on Track program, and what we have a Foundations of Academic Literacy course that enables students to take a W course, and that course is for students who don't get 75% or less in high school, and it tends to be, it's a credit course, but it's additive credit. It's not integral to the degree. So in a way, we're kind of punishing our multilingual students by providing them with additional support. We've looked at the literature of various models, and we are very interested in the adjunct tutorial model that you have here, as well as some of the co-teaching, and I'll talk about that. So we were developed to help mainstreamed multilingual learners, so those students who are already in our programs taking credit courses. And one of the problems that we have at SFU, one of the issues, is that, as I showed before, there's all these kinds of pockets of support, and students are confused and they don't know where to go. And so one of our roles is also to coordinate existing and future supports, to identify gaps, construct new and existing courses, and really do this in a research-informed way. But what we're really trying to do also is propose a shared responsibility and shared knowledge amongst faculty across the disciplines. This is a tall order for supporting international and EAL students from a scholarly foundation. And CELTER is part of the Faculty of Education. So we're really trying to work closely within disciplinary teaching and learning contexts, because more traditional models of language support were decentralized and decontextualized. We're really trying to get into that curricular core, working with applied sciences, arts and social sciences, health sciences, business, and so on, but also working with the various support units across campus. And so our approach, or our model toward engaging with faculty is, well, we don't wait until we're invited. We're quite proactive, but this is not a top-down approach, right? So we're really trying to have a collaborative model where we identify needs and issues and develop and scaffold the support for students, and also share best practices within the faculty and the university. We're doing this, we're really working on curricular redesign of courses and our programs, and on the whole idea of co-delivery, which I don't think has been done before, where you have a content and language faculty member together in the classroom. So some examples are, one of my colleagues, he taught a first-year world literature course where he used translingual writing, and students were able to bring in their home language or other languages into assessment and assignments. Imagine that. I'll speak in more detail, because I know there's not that much time left, but I'm the liaison also to the School of Business, and what we've implemented there is a post-entry diagnostic writing assessment, and we typically find that there's about 30% of the students who are at risk or struggling, and we're trying to develop a model of support for them that's curricular. And also, there's quite a lot of students who don't pass Business 360, business communications, so we want to be able to identify and support those students beforehand in the curriculum. So we're developing a Business 217 writing course that will be obligatory, called Critical Thinking in Business, where we're integrating content and disciplinary language learning outcomes, as well as critical thinking and critical literacy through a co-teaching model. So, for example, I'm really highlighting comparative language when the section on stakeholder versus shareholder analysis is going to be taught, focusing on key vocabulary and expressions, really including much more dialogue and communicative interaction into those classrooms, and focusing on those critical thinking skills, so designing assignments that promote critical literacy. We have a series of faculty development workshops that are really getting faculty to rethink teaching and learning in this multilingual context. So they're on academic integrity and plurilingual pedagogies. We're promoting this whole idea of disciplinary literacy, language awareness, getting students to think about their learning through metacognitive and self-regulation approaches. We're having, chemistry and accounting faculty learn about genre analysis, functional language analysis, content-based instruction. It is, in a way, an interdisciplinary collaboration that they can no longer sort of deny or reject, because this is the reality of the student body in front of them, right? And we are hoping to, we've already started, but conduct research and advance the field of, learning in an English-dominant context to multilingual learners within our context at SFU. So it's kind of interesting, because I feel that here, bilingual in this, just being in Ottawa and Ontario, bilingualism and not knowing French or English, it's okay, and everyone has a chance, but there's a bit of a taboo in being EAL or ESL in the West Coast. And how do we really create this institutional culture shift from difference as deficit to difference as a resource and a positive thing, and encouraging, yes, you're going to learn another language, and we value your home language and your multilingualism and your multiculturalism. And what we also want to do is help students become members and engage in the discourse of their discipline and encourage inclusion, diversity, and student success. So c'est d'où je viens, c'est ce que j'essaie de faire. Et je peux répondre aux questions en français et en anglais. À la fin. Oh, OK. Oui.
Alors, tu es où ici? Où est-elle?
Je crois que c'est celle-là.
Celle-là? Bon, alors allons-y. Bon. Merci. Alors, Claire Trépanier. Voilà.
Merci. Alors, si vous avez remarqué, SFU est en... Ah. Bravo, bravo. Alors, je suis ravie d'être ici aujourd'hui et je vais vous présenter un modèle d'immersion que j'ai déjà présenté à l'ILOP, justement, il y a peut-être 8-9 ans. Et la question, où en sommes-nous maintenant au niveau de l'immersion? We're still here. Alors, c'est très bien. Ce que vous voyez présentement, c'est une promo qu'on a créée cette année pour le recrutement étudiant à travers la province. Stand out, hein, il faut se démarquer. Donc, pour nous, l'immersion, c'est vraiment pour se démarquer. Le plan de ma présentation, je vais vous parler brièvement du Bureau des affaires francophones et francophiles, de l'éducation en et de langue française en Colombie-Britannique, quelques faits historiques et parler des effectifs. On a parlé tout à l'heure avec nos invités là au panel des effectifs. Je pense que c'est important de revenir là-dessus. À l'immersion à SFU, un modèle qu'on appelle le French Cohort Program, et quelques mots concernant les clés de réussite, défis et souhaits. Maintenant, pour nous, l'immersion à SFU, c'est davantage... Ça me semble coupé, hein? Il y a là... Où est-ce que c'est ma... Ça va? Bon, c'est davantage dans un contexte de continuum, donc assurer le continuum en éducation en français de la maternelle à la 12e année, mais aussi au niveau de l'enseignement postsecondaire en Colombie-Britannique. Et je me rappelle très bien de la première visite du commissaire Graham Fraser au tout début de son mandat. Il était venu en Colombie-Britannique et il avait utilisé l'expression « K to 16. Alors, je peux vous dire que moi, j'ai fait du pouce sur le K to 16. Et les collègues étrangers, là, vous connaissez K to 12. Alors, nous, c'est K to 16. En français, bien sûr. Alors, SFU a des choses importantes, je pense, à mentionner. Vous voyez les armoiries de SFU et on a un petit truc qui dit « Nous sommes prêts ». Hein? Même avec l'accent sur le « e », je pense, oui. Et donc, en 1965, comme l'a mentionné Valia, l'université a été créée. Et déjà, on présageait qu'il y aurait quelque chose qui se passerait en français 40 ans plus tard. Bien sûr, dans la foulée du plan d'action du plan Dion, il y a eu la création du Bureau des affaires francophones et francophiles. La mission est de développer, coordonner et faire la promotion des programmes en langue française au sein des facultés pour répondre aux besoins éducatifs des jeunes de la province. Notre structure du BAF est assez unique. Tout le monde va être unique, mais celle-là, je la trouve bien unique. On travaille avec 2 facultés et on nous dit, vous savez très bien ce que c'est de travailler à l'intérieur d'une faculté, travailler avec 2 facultés, hein, on s'arrache les cheveux, mais ça devient très complémentaire. Ça permet entre autres de la recherche et de la création de programmes qui est conjoint. Donc, la faculté d'éducation et la faculté des lettres et sciences sociales qu'on appelle Arts and Social Sciences. Donc, en 2004, septembre 2004, l'année où on a fait la première livraison du baccalauréat, majoritairement offert en français. Alors, je vous rappelle que le BAF a été créé en 2003-2004 et déjà en septembre 2004, on avait un programme de baccalauréat offert majoritairement en français. Le BAF joue un rôle important de soutien. Alors, je vais vous parler des quelques actions que nous faisons qui aident et qui soutiennent et qui enrichissent les programmes. Donc, appuyer les programmes dans les 2 facultés, contribuer aussi, ça fait partie de notre mandat, au rayonnement de la langue française, non seulement en SFU, mais dans la province. Je vais vous parler un petit peu plus tard de notre plan stratégique de marketing et de recrutement étudiant, c'est très important. Et toutes les activités aussi qui sont en lien avec les programmes. On a parlé tout à l'heure de l'importance de la culture, développement et l'offre d'activités culturelles. Tisser et maintenir des liens avec les communautés et organisations, institutions francophones, francophiles en Colombie-Britannique, au Canada et à l'international. Donc, on développe nous-mêmes des partenariats. On aide à développer des ententes interuniversitaires et c'est très important parce que l'université a comme vision stratégique un engagement communautaire, engaging the world. Alors, si vous allez sur le site de l'université, on a une vision stratégique qui a été développée il y a 5 ans, engaging the world, the most engaged university, et donc engaging students, engaging research and engaging communities. Le BAF joue un rôle important parce qu'il aide l'université à se positionner en tant que leader en enseignement postsecondaire en langue française au niveau de la province, au niveau national et au niveau international. L'université est membre de l'ACUFC, l'AIEQ bien sûr et l'AUF et on a aussi une représentante aujourd'hui de l'ACUFC, Caroline. Bonjour. Et la membriété de SFI au sein de la SCUFC est très importante. Entre autres, elle apporte des bourses pour les étudiants. Elle apporte des contacts interuniversitaires. Alors, par exemple, mardi prochain, il y aura est-ce que je peux l'annoncer, Caroline? Il y aura la signature d'une lettre d'entente entre des institutions françaises, 17, je crois, et 17 institutions canadiennes, pour faciliter la venue de jeunes Français-Françaises qui viendraient potentiellement enseigner dans les provinces pour enseigner dans les écoles francophones et dans les écoles d'immersion. Alors, la CEFC a facilité ces rencontres et on doit vraiment les remercier. Et nous, on a de la chance. On a la chance de pouvoir être membre de la CEFC. Maintenir le dialogue avec les gouvernements, bien sûr, fédéral et provincial. Vous savez que nous sommes dans une période importante de renouvellement de plans d'action par Patrimoine canadien. L'université est subventionnée dans le cadre d'une entente bilatérale et, bien sûr, ça se termine, comme tout le monde, en 2018. Donc là, présentement, on travaille pour le plan 2018-2023. Brièvement, quelques faits historiques concernant l'éducation en langue française et de langue française. Alors, je mets un petit contexte historique là, du 150e. La Colombie-Britannique s'est jointe à la Confédération en 71 et déjà à ce moment-là, il y avait 3 paroisses catholiques qui avaient des écoles en langue française. C'était dans un contexte où il y avait une très grande population, majoritairement européenne et bien sûr de l'Est du Canada, suffisamment pour ouvrir des écoles. Un autre point important, la Fédération des francophones de la Colombie-Britannique. Je parlais tout à l'heure de tisser les liens avec la communauté. La Fédération des francophones de la Colombie-Britannique a joué un rôle essentiel, important de lobbying pour la création du Bureau des affaires francophones et francophiles. Au niveau du français langue minoritaire, en 78, on a eu la première offre du programme cadre, le programme francophone qu'on appelle maintenant. Alors, dans 9 conseils scolaires anglophones, ça veut dire que les écoles francophones étaient gérées par des conseils scolaires anglophones. Mais en 95, la création du seul conseil scolaire francophone en Colombie-Britannique, où présentement, à travers la province, il y a 37 écoles francophones. Au niveau du français langue seconde, la première offre du programme d'immersion remonte à 68. Canadian Parents for French s'est établi en Colombie-Britannique en 77. Alors, j'ai mis en rouge la Fédération et Canadian Parents for French, qui sont vraiment les 2 organismes qui ont appuyé la communauté pour faire du lobbying auprès de Patrimoine canadien pour aller obtenir des sous pour la création du BAF et les programmes que nous offrons. En 77, avec un renouvellement en 2004, la BC Language Education Policy, donc enseignement obligatoire d'une langue seconde pour les élèves de 5e à 8e année et par défaut, le français était la langue la plus choisie. Maintenant, je vais passer à des statistiques parce que c'est toujours bien important. Au niveau du programme francophone, regardez l'augmentation depuis 5 ans. Vous allez me dire, dans 37 écoles francophones à travers la province, 5 700 enfants, c'est pas beaucoup, c'est important. Si on avait plus d'écoles, il y aurait probablement le double d'ayants droit qui auraient accès aux écoles francophones. Ça veut dire que plusieurs parents francophones choisissent de mettre leurs enfants en immersion ou bien avoir les enfants à l'école anglophone parce que c'est à côté. Au niveau de l'immersion, on en parlait tout à l'heure, Hubert a mentionné la croissance au niveau de l'immersion à travers le Canada. Hein? Ben, nous, on est au-dessus du 10% de ce qu'il avait donné comme statistique. Encore là, une énorme augmentation en immersion. Et là, vous allez dire, au niveau du français de base, il y a une baisse. Il n'y a pas vraiment une baisse parce qu'on a moins d'enfants. Au niveau démographique, il y a moins d'enfants, donc il y a moins d'enfants dans les écoles. Donc, ce n'est pas parce qu'il y a un manque d'intérêt. Ça veut dire que quand on pense aux Français en Colombie-Britannique, il y a ce nombre de jeunes, 275 000 jeunes, qui suivent des cours de français ou en français qui représentent à peu près 45 % de la population des jeunes. Alors, le modèle maintenant d'immersion qu'on appelle le French Core Program. Comme caractéristique, c'est un baccalauréat de 120 crédits sur 4 ans avec majeur et mineur ou double majeur, pluridisciplinaire. Dans ce cas-ci, sciences politiques, histoire et français. C'est un programme de type cohorte on accepte un groupe d'étudiants en septembre chaque année, 20 à 30 étudiants par groupe. C'est un cursus préétabli pour les cours obligatoires, où plus de 60% des cours sont offerts en langue française, mais parce qu'il y a dans le programme de 4 ans un programme d'échange étudiant obligatoire qui est requis pour l'obtention du diplôme de 1 ou 2 semestres. Là, vous pouvez imaginer que le pourcentage de cours suivis en français augmente énormément. Une approche pédagogique, et là, je vais référer à notre collègue qui a présenté les modes. Alors là, est-ce qu'on enseigne en français pour le français, etc., etc. Et je vais inviter notre collègue Laurent de venir probablement faire de la formation auprès de nos professeurs qui enseignent pour leur montrer est-ce que tu enseignes le français en français, etc. Et bon, on verra. Et je pense que demain, vous allez discuter de cette question parce que vous allez avoir la table ronde sur les enseignants de discipline. Tous les travaux et les examens sont en français pour, bien sûr, arriver à une bilittératie universitaire. Je reviendrai tout à l'heure. Alors, le French Cohort Programme, c'est beaucoup plus qu'un programme universitaire avec des cours, mais c'est une expérience académique enrichie avec un corps professoral qui provient de partout à travers le Canada, mais aussi à l'international. Et nous avons chaque année un programme, un événement dont nous sommes très fiers, que nous appelons le Printemps de la francophonie. Ça se passe au cours du mois de mai, où nous accueillons des conférenciers de partout de la francophonie canadienne. Donc cette année, nous avions 30 activités au cours du mois de mars, et une vingtaine de conférenciers. Et les conférenciers sont intégrés dans les cours et présentent une partie du cours essentiellement. Un encadrement, bien sûr, avec une conseillère pédagogique qui, dès le départ de la première année, suit bien les étudiants, avec un pathways, revoit le pathways de l'étudiant et suit bien l'étudiant. Un appui linguistique qui est différent de celui de l'Université d'Ottawa. Hein. Vous avez expliqué le modèle de l'Université d'Ottawa. Pour nous, c'est individualisé. Bien sûr, on a moins d'étudiants que chez vous, donc on peut se permettre. C'est à la demande, mais avec beaucoup de suggestions ou d'encouragement hein, à participer et à venir chercher cet appui linguistique. Des occasions d'engagement communautaire. J'ai parlé tout à l'heure de l'importance des liens que le bâtisse avec la ou les communautés. C'est important parce que ça permet aux professeurs de demander à leurs étudiants de faire de la recherche-action dans la communauté et pour les étudiants de travailler sur des projets basés dans la communauté. Donc, la recherche-action, c'est pour des crédits. Les projets basés dans la communauté, c'est souvent pour du bénévolat ou tout simplement une contribution. Mais un exemple de la contribution de la CEFC, par exemple, la CEFC va chercher auprès de Patrimoine canadien une bourse d'immersion, mais est rattachée à cette bourse d'immersion à un projet de recherche dans la communauté. Donc, c'est pas un freebie, hein, 5 000 $, sauf que l'étudiant doit donner 45 heures de son temps dans un projet communautaire. Dans la communauté francophone, bien sûr. Bon, les coops en français, bien sûr, on en a au niveau local et international. Et un autre volet qui est encore là, intégré dans le cadre des cours, c'est l'apprentissage expérientiel. Procès simulé avec l'association jeunesse de la Colombie-Britannique et notre collègue Rémi Légère a accompagné ses étudiants de politique 100 hein, à ce Parlement jeunesse. Le Parlement jeunesse et le projet simulé aussi dans l'intérieur d'un cours en français et bien sûr rédaction d'articles dans un journal local qui est le journal bilingue La Source. Je veux rapidement mentionner les partenaires universitaires. J'ai parlé tout à l'heure du programme d'échange étudiants obligatoire. Voici les partenaires avec lesquels nous avons travaillé au cours des dernières années. Alors, je mentionnais tout à l'heure le logo de l'université Engaging the World. Nous sommes dans une université anglophone, mais qui a plus que gentiment accepté de traduire l'expression Engaging the World, que nous avons traduit en français par Le Monde en tête. Alors, Quelques clés de réussite. D'abord, une volonté politique importante de la part de l'institution de travailler à développer l'immersion française au niveau postsecondaire, les liens solides avec la ou les communautés, je devais dire les communautés, le soutien apporté aux étudiants. Alors, on a parlé tout à l'heure, Michel a mentionné des taux de rétention, d'attrition. Alors, les taux d'attrition sont bas après la deuxième année. À la fin de la première année, évidemment, l'étudiant s'ennuie de maman ou bien trouve que l'écart entre... Parce que nous, ils arrivent du secondaire, là, ils ont 16-17 ans, ou bien tout simplement parce que la concentration que on leur offre, sciences politiques, histoire, etc., ne leur convient pas. Donc, ils restent à l'université. Le taux de réussite est élevé grâce à tout le soutien. Hein, on les soutient là vraiment, on les appuie au cours des 4-5 années, parce que parfois ils prennent 5 années aussi. La clé du succès de ce programme, c'est vraiment le programme d'échange. Alors, on a parlé tout à l'heure de l'importance de la culture et de l'intégration dans une société, dans une culture. C'est vraiment ce qui fait qui change la donne au cours de la troisième année et qui fait qu'en quatrième année, ils ont atteint leur littératie universitaire, leur expérience à l'étranger, le vécu dans une autre culture. C'est aussi parce que le programme, comme je l'ai mentionné, il est enrichi, mais il est aussi en évolution. Alors, un exemple concret, je pense que Rémi, qui enseigne dans ce cours, on peut l'annoncer maintenant. Le programme s'intitulait French Cohort Program en administration publique et services communautaires. Au départ, il a été créé en 2003. Ça correspondait à administration publique, services communautaires. C'était un programme niche. Et là, il aura un autre nom, French Cohort Program en... Dis-moi, Rémi? Affaires publiques internationales. Et pourquoi? Affaires publiques, bien sûr, administration publique est devenue affaires publiques, il n'y a pas de souci, on reste toujours au Canada. Mais affaires internationales aussi parce que les étudiants l'ont demandé. Les étudiants qui partent en échange, je vous ai montré tout à l'heure, ils vont au Canada, ils vont à l'international. Je veux dire que la majorité des étudiants choisissent à l'international. Et pour eux, c'est très important d'avoir des connaissances avant de partir et aussi après le retour, donc affaires internationales. Notre fierté, nous avons présentement 75 étudiants inscrits dans le programme, plus de 80 diplômés qui sont d'origine linguistique, qui ont un plurilinguisme individuel. Toi, tu as parlé surtout des étudiants qui arrivent et qui apprennent l'anglais, mais moi, je parle des étudiants qui sont des jeunes qui habitent la province, qui sont nés dans la province, et qui ont un plurilinguisme individuel et dont les parents ont choisi de les mettre en immersion française et bien sûr qui, au bout du compte, parlent les deux langues officielles. Alors, je vais terminer avec les défis. On a parlé du manque des écoles francophones et des places pour immersion en français. On vient tout juste d'apprendre qu'il y a eu un gain de la part de BC Teachers Federation pour réduire le nombre d'élèves dans les classes en Colombie-Britannique. Alors là, on a besoin de plus de salles de classe. Qui est-ce qui va écoper? À l'élémentaire, ce sera les programmes d'immersion française. Alors, Canadian Parents for French BC Yukon, là, ils ont envoyé un communiqué. Alors, il va y avoir beaucoup de changements, mais on a aussi, vous avez suivi les élections de la Colombie-Britannique. On est dans un contexte changeant. Alors, ça sera peut-être une chose pour nous. L'attrition, une pénurie d'enseignants, bien sûr, on a un grand besoin d'enseignants et d'enseignants qualifiés à enseigner, bien sûr, avec une compétence en français. On y travaille énormément parce que, justement, notre bureau travaille aussi avec la faculté d'éducation. Une attrition au niveau secondaire, donc un manque d'intérêt peut-être de poursuivre des études en français au secondaire, mais on se dit que si on a fait une plus grande offre de programmes au niveau universitaire, que ça aurait un impact direct, bien sûr, sur la rétention au niveau secondaire. Bon, alors, mes souhaits, Hubert est parti, merci. Hubert est parti, mais je dois me dire que c'est un investissement hein, de mettre de l'argent dans l'éducation de nos jeunes et moi, j'encourage la mobilité étudiante au national, à l'international. C'est la clé. Et bien sûr, le soutien pour les bourses d'études, etc., etc. C'est une question d'investissement. C'est pas de l'argent jeté à la rivière. Alors, tiens, je voulais vous montrer rapidement. Non, j'ai pas le temps. Bon, voilà. Alors, Vancouver. Bienvenue à Vancouver. On vous attend, tout le monde. Merci.
Merci Claire. Nous avons maintenant une communication préenregistrée de Mary Paquet de l'Université de Namur.
Hello, everyone.
C'était en Belgique. Mary aurait dû être avec nous, sauf que elle a décidé d'attraper une méningite. Donc, elle est restée en Belgique. But yeah, so she had meningitis a few weeks ago, so she still recorded her presentation. But we'll try to connect with her via Skype for the question periods after that. We had a trial run this morning and it was working, so we'll see.
Both are part of the whole. Construire des partenariats pédagogiques des enseignants de matières ou de disciplines dites non linguistiques et de langue pour une approche intégrée en immersion. C'est une communication bilingue, and in this bilingual presentation, I will talk about a certain pedagogical challenge in immersion teaching. I'll contextualize the research that was carried out, puis je parlerai de certains des résultats, des implications et recommandations ayant découlé de cette recherche. Et enfin, très brièvement, des travaux en cours, very briefly touching on then a toolkit development project. This presentation is indeed focusing on a challenge central to immersion, which is developing our teaching which integrates target language learning with the content discipline learning. And there have been many studies recently looking at how that happens when both the learning and the teaching. But one thing that I want to emphasize very much is the contextualized nature of immersion, and that this requires local players to define what quality integrated learning means in their context. In other words, with their particular learners, les réalités locales sont différentes, les programmes, les curricula, les profils des apprenants, etc. And one very practical implication of this is for subject content teachers and language teachers to need to co-construct their teaching for integrated learning, and this is in my opinion, through pedagogic partnership at the local level. To contextualize the research briefly, I'm sitting in politically trilingual Belgium with Dutch, French, and German, the official state languages, and we're situated, of course, at what we call the heart of Europe. I'm in French-speaking Belgium, and here is that's represented by the yellow part on the southern part then of Belgium, the yellow part on the map. Our bilingual provision is officially called Immersion in a décret immersion, and it's been organized officially since 1998. I've been on board this train since the beginning. We can offer Dutch, German, or English as the target languages, and we can offer various actual models of immersion, with both early partial, late partial, but also then continuing from early into secondary models, continuing models of immersion. And just a few figures showing that there are quite a few learners involved. It's been very popular and increased through the years with more and more learners, more and more schools, more and more teachers too. The setting for the research was in secondary school immersion, and just to highlight a couple of the features. There are most often between 2 to 4 subjects involved, about 35% of the curriculum taught all year long. And another characteristic that's particular to our context is that the language course is officially included in the immersion provision, comptabilisé, as the décret immersion calls it. And le problème ou la problématique de recherche ici, c'est que le cadre décrétal exige des liens entre les cours de langue et les cours de matière, Et en même temps, donc le service général de l'inspection a constaté dans le rapport de 2010 un manque de collaboration entre ces enseignants. Donc il y a une particularité d'avoir d'une part rendu obligatoire la collaboration entre les enseignants de langue et de matière qui enseignent toutefois durant des plages horaires séparées, et d'autre part de ne pas avoir ni défini, ni concrétisé, ni opérationnalisé cette collaboration. Autrement dit, how to make it work. Recherche a été menée donc pendant 4 ans pour interroger la nature et les processus de collaboration, essayer de mieux comprendre toute la problématique, avec une investigation théorique ayant construit un modèle analytique sur base de la littérature, et avec une étude empirique ayant testé et complété le modèle. Il y avait 7 écoles secondaires donc, qui ont participé dans cette recherche. And the specific context for this presentation today is actually a multi-perspectival follow-up case study of one of the 7 schools that had participated in the bigger initial study, and using the model that was developed as an analytical tool for the data collected. The research question asks, how is subject teacher and language teacher pedagogic collaboration in immersion perceived by this school's immersion players? A couple of the characteristics of this school is that it's a late immersion project offering their immersion through Dutch. It's located in a very big city, and in particular, c'est une école qui accueille un public socio-économiquement défavorisé, avec presque 50 nationalités représentées. En termes méthodologiques, donc une démarche multiperspective, j'ai cueilli des données des enseignants, de la directrice et de 9 groupes focus d'apprenants. Et puis, une analyse qualitative des données donc a été effectuée à l'aide du modèle dynamique. And I'm going to briefly show you the model, which starts by identifying 5 categories of conditions and factors and processes which interact in the development and influence the development of a partnership that could eventually co-construct this integration. And what's particular too and important to underline is that the 5 categories are imagined as lenses, comme des lunettes à travers, ou des lentilles à travers lesquelles les enseignants peuvent percevoir donc des influences sur leur collaboration. 3 catégories sont d'ordre extrinsèque. Une catégorie liée à ce qui a trait à la vie courante en dehors de l'école, qui soulève une question: quels aspects de la vie en dehors de l'école influencent la disponibilité et les priorités pour la collaboration? This can touch on health problems or family situations, priorities and responsibilities, perhaps also responsibilities linked to other professional activities outside of the one school, perhaps teaching in several schools or having another profession at the same time. Une autre catégorie est de nature micropolitique et institutionnelle qui soulève la question: qui dit que nous devrions collaborer? À quel agenda cela répond-il? Et une catégorie également d'ordre organisationnel pratique. Collaborer quand? Qui doit donner de son temps? Avec quelles ressources? 2 autres catégories sont plutôt d'ordre intrinsèque. So 2 other categories are more intrinsic, mindset related. Une catégorie d'ordre culturel liées à la construction de sens, qui soulève une question de fond, pourquoi collaborer, et une catégorie culturelle liée à l'identité, collaborer avec qui dit quoi, qui fait quoi. Chaque catégorie est détaillée d'indicateurs, et je vais montrer juste un exemple de catégorie d'influence d'ordre organisationnel et pratique, avec 4 ici sous-catégories et une multitude donc d'indicateurs, juste pour montrer la complexité, so the complexity of so many, each category having so many different issues, factors, and processes that it can impact, of course, upon the development of effective teacher collaboration. And so the model is actually trying to unpack this and be able to see some of the nuances at a local level. Le modèle dans son ensemble, so the overview of the whole model, shows 3 dynamic and concurrent states, as I've called them, that can culminate in the creation of integration space. Donc trois états d'être et qui sont concomitants. And what I must underscore here is that this is not a linear model, and these are not, therefore, chronological stages. So just keeping that in mind. So that's zooming out to see the whole model. Now we're going to zoom in to be able to see it more specifically, and each state for analyzing the data that was collected. The first state visualizes the teachers as separate circles, and they are also, this also is representing the separate current life factors, teaching identities, classroom realities, even though they share the learners, but at different times, say in their timetables, and with different curricular programs too. And to consider the data with this aspect of the model in mind, teacher viewpoint first just really insists upon that there's much too little collaboration, and that things are quite individual and separate. The head teacher agrees and says that even teachers are by nature people who have a hard time working together. And student or learner viewpoint just confirms this, saying, well, it's totally different. In Dutch class, we talk about certain things, and in history class, other things, so automatically we don't make any links either. So this really, as a findings, it shows that their perception is that realities are indeed separate and of individualistic nature, and that there's not enough collaboration. Now, moving to the second state, simultaneously this second state then concerns the micro-political or institutional issues, but also those of an organizational and practical nature. And these are represented by the arrows above and below the teacher circles that are at diagonal angles and can push the circles towards or away from each other. So these are potentially direct or indirect influences, and that can be perceived potentially positively or negatively or in conflict, really, as having encouraging and facilitating influence, or perhaps the contrary, contriving and impeding influence on their collaboration. So to consider some of the data then, first with the organizational practical category of factors in mind, well, the teachers really highlight that their collaboration is informal, over a cup of coffee at the break, maybe through email or Facebook, and they perceive a real lack of time to collaborate more, but realize that it would be difficult to ask for more time, and that is confirmed by the head teacher viewpoint, because she's not got more time to be able to give. The time is the time is limited and needs also to be used with, in particular with their population of learners for some remediation, for example. The learner viewpoint confirms this, simply saying that, for example, other than during class council meetings where the teachers are together, I don't think that they meet up. So we see a perceived lack of time to collaborate on the one hand. And when we move on to consider the micropolitical institutional category of influences, here in the data with the teacher viewpoint, we see that there's a real strong feeling of the need to share values, the same kind of values for education, have the same goal overall, and in particular when they think of their population of learners that haven't always got it easy every day, as a teacher says, and that we can show them that immersion is accessible, that perhaps it's not too difficult. And the head teacher, we can see that this is something that she feels very strongly about, and that, as she says, she's always found it from the beginning important to propose immersion to a population that's a bit fragile, as she says, like ours is, and that she's very proud to show that it works. And so here we see that there's an ethos, an educational culture really there for the success of their learner population in immersion, despite the lack of time to collaborate. And this comes out as well resoundingly when we consider the data that was collected with the learners. Here we've got different individuals speaking with the different colors, but via, for example, the question if, from their experience, they think immersion can be for anyone, for everyone, and they say yes. If we've succeeded, so can they. Everybody, but you have to work. You have to be motivated, etc. But yes, and also via the question of value added. For example, what immersion has brought them, and here the data suggests different sorts of value added that the learners perceive. Value added that's psychological, linked to self-esteem, for example, confidence as communicators, being at ease, for example, being more at ease. Also linguistic value added with finding it easier to learn a language. They suggest cognitive benefits as well, with concentration, that's a plus, thinking in Dutch, and I like this when we think both in Dutch and in French, and I speak Moroccan at home. And also cultural benefits that are suggested by the learners here, with adaptation, being able to adapt to different sorts of situations, and also underlining open-mindedness and tolerance. And so, that is very, very important. And moving on to then the third state, which coincides with the first two. This third state represents the dynamic influences of cultural sense-making and identity-related natures. And these are represented by the dotted arrows that alternate between the teacher circles, potentially drawing them together. And here can be represented the interrelational and negotiation, regulation processes in the relationship. And these can allow, if we move to a second part, this third state having sort of three parts to it, being able to potentially allow for the teachers to co-construct over time a collaborative professional partnership through seeking a degree of overlapping goals and values, and then being able to build upon it pedagogically. To consider the data with these aspects in mind first, before moving to the culminating factor, the integration space question, teacher viewpoint here simply, highlights the fact that they get along well, that they've got a good working environment, and the head teacher totally concurs, saying that the teams, the dual teams, as I've called them, of teacher, language and content teacher partners, that these dual teams get along well, and just to add an example of learner viewpoint, yes, certain teachers communicate with each other. At least that's what they view. So there's a certain, we can say, collegial atmosphere. There are perceived positive mindset influences, and it's when we get to this culminating aspect then that certain questions are raised. And this is where we're talking about the integration space, within that overlap, sort of a conjugation of the factors and conditions and processes that are like a spiral dynamic that I've proposed here. And to pause just one moment to look at this more closely, what I'm proposing then, when I say integration space, c'est proposé comme un espace discursif et de co-développement où les conditions favorables sont expressément cherchées et réunies, et les enseignants partenaires de dual teams peuvent approfondir leur compréhension critique de leur pratique et plus efficacement concevoir ensemble leurs identités, leurs rôles respectifs d'une part, mais aussi leurs objectifs communs, qui sont les objectifs sont que les apprenants apprennent et utilisent la langue cible, apprennent les matières disciplinaires à travers cette langue et développent les compétences et les discours ou les littératies relatifs aux disciplines qui sont enseignées. Et donc, cet espace dans lequel il y a un progrès dans une relation de travail durable et mutualisante. What I've called integration through collaboration and collaboration through integration. So, coming back to the data and considering it with this in mind, this is where many questions are raised. Teachers here are really insisting with what they had to say about the need to work on this, that these are constructing bridges that would be key to success, and that it's neglected, for example, and that there's a real need to go further, as this one teacher keeps insisting upon, and others too. Another teacher saying that it's something that's very important to him. So this realizing there are lacks, there are weaknesses concerning this articulation and co-construction of integration. And the head teacher says, yes, she perceives a desire to make progress, but that it's not sufficiently carried out in practice. So we see perceived a necessity to deepen the pedagogic collaboration for integrating learning. So there are positive mindset influences, but there's a need to go further that they perceive, which is then the question at heart, what is the integration space here? And to just go a little bit more deeply into this question and show how the teachers and how the different players rather insist. Teacher viewpoint, again, there's confusion. There's confusion in trying to figure this out. One teacher saying, well, I perceive myself as a math teacher, but on the other hand, who wasn't concerned with the linguistic development and assessment in my class, in my course, but on the other hand, where's the hat of integration that brings everything together? It's not clear. And another teacher saying, well, we actually need to have two hats. We need to say that a science teacher is also at the base a teacher of language, using language. And the head teacher finds it unclear too, in that she says that on the one hand, the language course is not sufficiently serving and supporting the immersion program, but on the other hand, saying that subject teachers have, in her opinion, a very big role to be able to pinpoint what it is that they need, but then conceding that that can't be easy for them because, well, of course, they're not trained to do that. That's not their area of didactic training, and yet that there's a need to synchronize things. So there are ambiguities, positive mindset influences that are perceived, but a perception of a need to go further, and it's not clear to them. So this brings us to three areas of results which resonate from these data. Trois résultats principaux qui résonnent au départ des données. Premièrement, des constats, et c'est en parallèle avec les états d'être donc du modèle. Premièrement, des constats que les réalités sont bien perçues comme séparées et qu'il n'y a pas assez de collaboration entre les enseignants de matière et de langue, ce qui est tout à fait typique et trouvé dans d'autres écoles également. Mais deuxièmement, dans ce cadre, donc des valeurs communes fortes de la direction et en cascade vers les enseignants aussi, une conscience de l'importance de la réussite du projet, surtout pour leur public d'apprenants. Et troisièmement, donc un désir d'approfondir la collaboration pédagogique pour mieux élaborer une approche intégrée. Donc ils sont sensibles à l'intégration pour le bénéfice de leurs apprenants, mais ils se sont désarmés, ils sont demandeurs de temps et d'outils. Just showing a couple more quotations here with the head teacher saying at the very end of the interview that she's coming to a realization that there's a real need to be aware of the importance of such integration, and a teacher mentioning that this is also an example to the students when the teachers work together. The implications of these analyses call for better top-down and bottom-up understandings of what integration can be, what it needs to be locally, and of collaboration and how the different things that affect it. So purposefully reinforcing the integration space between the dual teams, as I've called them once again, of teacher partners, all to the benefit, of course, of their learners. Recommendations have included co-construction of supportive measures with and for the players. And that's what's en route right now on our side, trying to develop a toolkit that could foster this integration space creation and the practices within it, with participatory practitioner-based methods, trying to develop then some practical but principled scaffolds aiming to support progress with integration space. And when we're talking about the dual teams of teachers, the progress is in various areas that we're aiming for, areas with potential value to both parties. And here is a list of several of the areas: better discovering each other's discipline areas and discourses involved, having common vision for their learners, comparing their curricula, but also their perceptions of their shared learners' needs, related both to the discipline, but also linguistically speaking, associating their course plans, co-planning, synchronizing where they can to better meet those needs, and when possible and when appropriate, co-designing units, materials, tasks, projects, perhaps even co-teaching if the resources allow it, but overall developing with time a joint modus operandi for their partnership. So to conclude, I'll give the last word to a teacher here. I think we need each other if we want immersion to work well. We have to work together and exchange ideas. The students learn something in the content course, and we language teachers are there to sharpen it. Both are part of the whole. And so we have to collaborate. It's a mindset I think we can do better. I think we can be better. And so going from something that could look a bit like this, where are the articulations, where are the bridges that allow for this, both are part of the whole, to make a little reference here to the visual, the poster for this symposium. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Hello, everyone. Both are part of the...
Oui. Non, c'est pas celui-là. Tu viens l'ouvrir, ouais.
2 secondes.
Donc, on essaie de joindre Mary par Skype et on va ouvrir les questions portant sur les 3 présentations que nous venons d'entendre.
Est-ce que vous avez des questions pour Mary?
Clic.
Bon. Elle va...
Bonjour Mary.
Bonjour.
Donc, on arrive à la période de questions. Donc, les gens dans la salle vont pouvoir poser des questions, pas nécessairement juste pour toi, mais aussi pour les 2 autres personnes qui ont présenté. Donc, je suppose que tu vas arriver à entendre tout ça? Non?
Pardon? je suis désolée, je ne vois rien. Non, je ne vois rien. Mais j'entends...
Non, ça va, mais
Elle n'entend pas.
la caméra fonctionne pas.
Est-ce que c'est mieux? Ben voilà.
Ah, ça c'est mieux, oui. Hello everybody, bonjour tout le monde.
Oui, c'est bon. Bonjour Mary, c'est Richard Clément. Alors, je vais diriger la période de questions, si tu permets. Alors, donc, on a environ 15 minutes. On va dépasser l'heure prescrite, mais nous allons tout de même prendre 15 minutes. Ça va? OK. Pour des questions? Oui.
La caméra est aussi micro, donc il se peut que tu aies à répéter les questions pour Mary.
D'accord, merci. Alors, des questions, s'il vous plaît. Identifiez-vous, et si la question est dirigée vers une personne en particulier, s'il vous plaît, identifiez-la. Oui, madame.
Au campus Saint-Jean de l'Université d'Alberta. J'ai une question pour Claire. Lorsque vous avez indiqué que la CUFC proposait une entente pour permettre ou encourager les Français de devenir enseignants en Colombie-Britannique, vous parliez de l'enseignement à quel niveau? Scolaire?
Oui. Alors, ça marche? Oui, ça marche. Vous savez qu'il y a une pénurie d'enseignants à travers le Canada au niveau élémentaire, secondaire et dans toutes les catégories, programmes francophones, immersion et français de base. Donc, c'est pour amener des jeunes Français qui, présentement, auraient complété un Master 2 en FLE. Donc, ce seraient des enseignants de langue, essentiellement, et qui ne se trouvent pas, entre autres, de travail en France et qui ont aussi l'aventure, une envie d'aventure. Donc, l'objectif serait de faciliter la venue de ces jeunes Français au Canada, qu'ils s'inscrivent à des programmes de formation professionnelle d'enseignants, donc dans le cadre d'un baccalauréat, si c'est le bac chez vous, en éducation, par exemple. Chez nous, c'est une formation d'enseignants qui dure 12 mois, éventuellement va passer à 16 mois. En Ontario, je crois que c'est 2 ans. Maintenant, bon. Donc, faciliter la venue de ces jeunes Français, les intégrer dans un programme de formation des enseignants pour qu'ils puissent ensuite se retrouver dans les salles de classe, non seulement dans les grandes villes, parce que les besoins sont aussi dans les régions rurales, et je pense que c'est le même cas partout à travers le Canada.
Merci. D'autres questions? Marlene, yes.
This is Tivalia. I met with you yesterday and I was fascinated. I think you overestimate the enlightenment of Ontarians about plurilingual learners. I think there's definitely a deficit model, even here, because, there are the 2 languages and then there's the rest. And I'm not saying it's denigrated, but it's the same. And I'm fascinated with that program. I'm looking forward to hearing what you do that we can all copy. How we persuade each other, how we can merge with other faculty. It's very complicated. I appreciate
It's a definite culture shift. And I think we also really need to think about how do we reward and recognize faculty who engage in this collaboration in integration, especially faculty who are pre-tenure, right? And they need to focus on scholarship and publication, and yet we're placing demands on their time. Time was a key factor in this latest presentation to support our students, right?
D'autres, je vous en prie.
Yeah, I was actually just wondering if you could elaborate. It sort of relates to that. You talked about EL or ESL students. It's a taboo. I was wondering if you could speak further to that, and then how you talked also about part of the program tries to communicate to them the value of their language and culture, and how that's done. How is that communicated?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's communicated through even just wording, like, you know, we're trying to stay away from your ESL or even EAL. You are multilingual. This is an asset to know more than one language. So getting faculty, everyone to use that word as an identifier is one step, right? So words really count. For example, the Foundations of Academic Literacy course, which is a great course, and it's not a language course. It really is about developing your skills in critical writing, reading. Students who don't have the expected level of language in English have to take it, and they feel that by taking that course, that starts to categorize them. And it really shouldn't be that way. So in some ways, we are providing support, and I like how adjunct courses allow us to provide support to those students, but in a way, it's kind of like in the K-12 model, you're pulling them out. And the pull-out model reinforces. So how do you know, that label? And yet if we don't have categories and labels, we can't get funding from the government, right? So it's very complex, or we can't get funding from the BV Academics Office, right? So it's this very complex situation, but that's why we're experimenting with co-teaching in the classroom, because in fact, this awareness of language and literacy, I think it can be beneficial to first language. Students have English as a first language. So that's what we're experimenting with. But it really does depend on the level of language, where you're at, and really supporting the idea that the developmental approach towards language. We're always learning language. I'm still trying to improve my English, my French, and I'm forgetting my Greek, which is my mother tongue. Right. So really trying to encourage a developmental approach towards language. I don't know if that answered your question, but that makes it less taboo, right?
Claire.
OK, Rémi. Vas-y.
Oui.
I had a question for Mary, actually. Hi, Mary. I'm not sure if you can see me.
Yes, I can.
My name is Remy Leger. I'm at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia.
Columbia, yeah.
Quite far from Namur, Belgique. My question is on your...
But I have a daughter in Seattle.
Oh, okay. Very close, yeah. My question is about the data that you collected in your project. So in your conclusion is about this integration space, but is the integration space desired by the teachers themselves? I can see from like a researcher perspective that you're developing the model and you see that there's a need for this, but was that articulated by the teachers themselves, that they basically need time to sit down and think about how they're going to do this? The creation of what you call this integration space. What did the teachers themselves have to say about that?
Well, they didn't use the words integration space. The whole concept of integration, on the one hand, seems normal, but on the other hand, seems totally vague. And especially from their point of view, when they're sharing the learners, but at different times in the timetable. There isn't co-teaching, but even if it could be. If I hesitate, it's because I hear an echo, I'm sorry. But definitely a desire to go further than just sort of a collegial level, especially as the more and more experience these teachers have in trying to meet their joint, if I can say it that way, joint learners' needs. And so then trying to experiment from time to time, trying to work together, and then feeling all of the constraints, time being one of them, but it's not the only one, constraints, how to go beyond certain constraints. Sometimes it had to do with their cultural identity in terms of their discipline area, where the angle that's coming from, their discourses, etc., and realizing they're not quite understanding each other as teachers, and wanting to get past that. So that's an aspect too. And so all of that is what I'm saying is sort of the conjugation of these factors, where if there can be a conjugation that's positive enough, there can be a way to go beyond that certain level of collegiality, yes, but also a better deepening understanding on their part of what it is that they're trying to do in trying to develop an integrated approach to their teaching. And yet, on the other hand, that it's not just going to drop out of the sky. They do need certain environmental factors to be able to help allow for that, time being one of them. But at least, I mean, there are examples that we had in the data where a partnership was working extremely well, totally despite the fact that they did not have the time. And this was over time, and with the perseverance of wanting their professional relationship as dual partners to be meeting those needs, but also for them to be better understanding each other as teachers from where they were coming from in their different disciplinary areas. So have I answered your question sufficiently?
Thank you.
Yeah, sure, you're very welcome.
Yes.
I have a question for Mary. I'm Diana Regan from LaSalle University in Philadelphia.
I can't hear you, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
I'm from LaSalle University in Philadelphia. Maybe you addressed this question. How are the teachers? How do they pick each other, or because here you've got, you kept talking about a head teacher, and sometimes we know that teachers are territorial, and that perhaps one doesn't like to. There could be a personality conflict, I mean, on a human nature kind of level. And my second question is, if you'll allow me, is how does the university justify the pay salary? Because now you have two teachers being paid for the same class, and how does that work as far as rostering? I don't know, but with us, there's a problem sometimes of losing faculty or adjuncts because there's not enough students. So if you have two teachers in one class, now you're paying two teachers for the same class. And
in the case that I was coming from, in the cases even behind the specific follow-up case study that I presented in the video, we're talking about a secondary education context where there's a language course in any case and other subject areas, other discipline areas. And for it to be transferable to the university context, it would be where there is some sort of language support, language course, or in any case, the kind of academic language development type of course, at the same time as there are other discipline areas being taught. And they do, in our context, they were not together. So there's not a question of paying for two teachers, two for the price of one type of thing. No way. They've got their own separate course hours, which is on the one hand part of the problem, but on the other hand part of the positive challenge. Now, do they choose each other? No. These were hours that were attributed to them, which raises part of the question from the micropolitical / institutional type of level, where it comes to managing, for example, on the human relations level, if there are ways of it not just only being, for example, top-down decision for somebody to be sent, somewhere, or be part of this project, this partnership, when it boils right down to the actual people involved, the individuals involved, if there's, that has to do with managing the actual human resources to try to see the people who could go together, who could best go together. It takes a lot on the individual level. This came out of the research. It wasn't part of what I presented, but it takes, among the different factors, if I take the ones that were institutional and organizational, on the other side, the what I call the mindset factors, that's where it really boils down on the interrelational level of people being engaged sufficiently in the idea of partnership to be able to surpass, in a sense, over time at least, the kinds of relational things where people, where people don't necessarily click. For example, I remember a teacher, and it's in the bigger data, one of the teachers saying very clearly, you don't have to be best friends to be able to have a very efficient and evolving professional relationship as teachers coming from totally different discipline areas. But it does take at least the individual, what I called individual's responsibility mindset. So a sufficient openness and flexibility, being able to, see that maybe discipline areas can have at times flexible boundaries rather than, who I'm not of this, that, and the other teacher, but where can we find overlap that can go beyond some of our maybe disciplinary I say boundaries, but maybe biases as far as what is, what is good language, what is good teaching, what is good, what is it that our learners need? So openness, flexibility, sharing, enough basic communication. So having a willingness to share, having a willingness to show what you're trying to do, and over time that builds the kind of trust, of course, like in really in any relationship, but where there is a modus operandi being able to little by little be formed, where these partners recognize the needs and the roles of their partners for that integrated learning, that little by little that they are more and more aware that they are co-constructing for their learners.
Thank you. I believe that's all the time we have for questions. So thank you, Claire, and thank you, Valia, and thank you, Mary. We now have a short break, and we should reconvene at
4 o'clock?
Okay, 4:05.